It's a common question that I get a lot of the time, especially with basketball players who you have guys that want to work 3 hours plus a day when they're in the gym. And then, like you said, you're getting into injuries and stuff like that. So I think one thing that a lot of you guys take for granted is how young you are and how able you are. But what you have to realize is that jumping is inherently intense. It's incredibly intense, the forces that you're seeing and the speed that you're seeing those forces. So you're gonna train by doing your sport. Okay, so you can't isolate it and say, well, this is training and this is my sport. Okay, because the body doesn't do that. Your biology, the way your body is, it doesn't separate it and say, oh, well, I played so hard as a basketball. Well, that's not training. Okay, that still has a load. There's a physiological cost to that, and I'm sure Mark could probably talk about that. As you get to the higher levels, typically what they do is they fill gaps. So if I haven't seen a strength stimulus in a month, okay, that's probably a hole I need to fill, right? I've seen tons of elastic contacts because I'm jumping 3 times a week, right? Well, when was the last time I did a strength session? Okay, so it's these windows of opportunity that you have that's where you want to capitalize on that. So if I'm in season, and I'm playing a heavily packed schedule of 3 games a week, I might maybe get one light lift in on one of those days, but it's going to be really tough because you're playing so much at such a high level. So to train and have the benefits of training and that adaptation, you're having that through your games and your playing, and then you need to say, okay, what am I missing? What gaps do I have to fill in my training? If it's a heavy weight room session, maybe you get that one session in or keep it at 45 minutes and just kind of keep it simple. Maybe you have one game a week where you've jumped hundreds of times prior to that, the weeks prior. So you probably don't need to stress jumping anymore. You probably need a little bit of a strength stimulus to kind of maintain that quality. That's kind of what I would say to that.
Coach McKown, can we ask just about how about an NBA player? How do you see their training change between in season and off season? How does that look?
So the guy whose name's on this building was and still is the most unique athlete I've ever been around. At first, I thought he was a bit delusional. He's not here to say it. And honestly, I'm thinking, geez, man, how good could you be if you just trained a little smarter? But what I learned was, because the guy would do this, he would train incredibly hard, hit his lower body on back-to-back days. And who in your trains lifts? Who lifts? Let's talk about lifting, Steve. Okay, right? I mean, it's probably, I know these guys will hit you with this, but like, if I want to be more powerful, there's a strength and there's a speed component. So in other words, how fast my muscles react, respond, act. And then obviously the strength component. So it's easier to improve strength in general, but you need to do both. Well, he would, but in general, so if you guys just went out and mashed your legs today at camp, I think you guys, anybody here leg fatigued now? From now, right? I'm not surprised. This is third day. So you need to allow your muscles time to recover. Well, his body adapted, I guess, and so there's a genetic factor in there. So in other words, he's blessed with this ability to recover. But he could train and recover really fast, which is why for years, if you went back and looked at the data, you'd see that the Jazz had a really incredible record on back-to-back games. So in other words, playing Houston today, and then you play in, wherever, New Orleans the next day, you'd see that the Jazz had this great record on those back-to-back games. Part of it would be that, guys like Carl could recover really fast. They were conditioned going into it, blah, blah, blah. But in general, sometimes less is more. So if you're in the middle of your volleyball season and you feel a leg weary, then, honestly, if you're honest with yourself, we lie to ourselves all the time, right? Like I woke up this morning, looked at the mirror, and said, damn, he's handsome, but that's bullshit. It's like, excuse me, Andy, I realize this is not South Carolina. All right, but the point is, listen to your body, trust your body, but you got to learn your body. And I promise you, probably the older guys in here that have trained a lot and competed a fair amount, know their bodies. Most of us don't. I've only been around, X amount of NBA guys that really knew their body, but you got to listen to your body. And if your body says, "Hey, I'm tired. I need to relax," and relax. But keep in mind too that your body can handle a lot more than you think it can. And I would bet the bulk of you haven't scratched the surface on what you can do. So the point is, going way back to the beginning, you can train your body to adapt and recover faster. Now, I haven't seen anybody since that has the capability to recover like Carl did. So I wouldn't suggest anybody that's like mashing your lower body 2 days in a row, whether or not it's a strength session or a power session, right? But listen to your body, train your body during the off season so it adapts faster. Allow yourself X amount of time to recover because that's part of it, and your capacity to work would improve. In general, which we don't have the luxury of in general, if you're in the NBA, you would not mash your lower body or your body period on the day before a game. But we don't have that luxury. And then if you're a guy that doesn't get a lot of minutes, so you're not playing that much, we'll mash you on game day. And then with the understanding that maybe a situation's going to arise where you're going to have to get minutes and play, and it's just a risk you need to take because we're developing you for the long run. I have no idea if I forgot Ricky was here.
How's it going?
Hey, good.
Along those lines, so recovery, especially with the high school, college guys that come in here, recovery, I like to say, is earned. So a lot of these guys will come in, they want to use the boots, the stem to recover, but they haven't really, like he said, worked to their capacity and built any type of base where they need to use recovery. And at the same point, so I've heard this from people, build a bank account. So pre-season, off-season, you got to build a really big base capacity, a work capacity, so that in season you can keep training. A lot of guys will start training, they won't give themselves enough time to build that base, and then they'll try to start getting intense without enough time before a season and in season. So if you really build a good off-season base, in season you should be able to keep high intensities with your workouts without overdoing it, and then it won't be a big deal. A lot of guys hit season, they're afraid to be sore for their games and et cetera. Well, really, if you build a big base, you should be able to work out in season, maybe not as much volume, intensity. When Coach had me helping with the Jazz, these guys were under the tunnel before they even got on the court, doing very intense warm-ups. It was pretty much a workout. From what I remember, single leg lunges, lateral plyos, ankle bands, glute stuff. It was probably more intense than a lot of guys in here that I've seen working out sometimes, right? Because they've built such a big base that they can do that. And then priming workouts, maybe use those pre-game warm-ups as your weekly workout, maybe if you're not getting enough minutes, like Coach said. I was a baseball guy, so I was a reliever. I had to be ready to throw every day of the week. So I would actually do a shorter, intense workout 30 minutes before I threw, which is unheard of. A lot of guys won't lift all season or go after a game. I like to use that as my priming session to get my body ready, but also as my workout for that day. And then you got to know your body. You got to know how much intensity, volume you can handle. If that makes sense. RSI, coach, one more thing. The RSI that we talked about, so if you got force plates, jump mat, great way to see your nervous system, auto-regulation. Other ways is bar speed, maybe a vertical jump. So if you want to see, that day, should I be training? If you're inches off what your baseline is, maybe it's not a great idea to crush it, right?
There's sorry, just on that note where you can test your nervous system reactivity. I downloaded this free app, and it's a tap app for your phone. So what I'll have my athletes do is pre and post session, depending on the day of the week, is we'll test basically just their neurological reactivity by tapping this screen, and then we'll compare their numbers pre and post session, and then beginning and end of the week. Allows for a little bit more metric in terms of being able to monitor and maintain their workout intensity throughout the week. So I think it's for tap something. I don't know. Hit me up and I'll let you know what it is.
Tap test.
Yes. That's right.
Next question, Isaiah.
So when you're dunking, like the dunking season's the summer, right? So you might have an event like every week, every 2 weeks. How would you compete for that, and specifically with the lifting? What kind of lifting? Because a lot of guys do light explosive lifting. I personally would like to do heavy lifting, but it doesn't work for other guys. So like, what have you guys found to be the best thing to do?
Who wants to take that? John?
I think a lot of what you're going to see in competition is going to be dependent on what you did before that. So, would you say it's August through September? Is that what you said?
Like June through August,
So
like the
June
summer.
through August, you basically have three-ish months. Okay, so 12 months in a year. So we have 9 months to prep for that period of time. What did you do in those 9 months? So you're probably going to take a month off when you're done, right? And then you have 8 months to load up. Okay, so what did you do during those 8 months? That's the first thing that I want to know. If you didn't do anything and you were just dunking, don't change anything. Okay, maybe jump a little bit less. Now, if you trained a lot and you adapted to everything, so your capacity went way up here, right? Versus where you were just down here not doing anything. Okay, and you train smart and your capacity's way up here. Okay, maybe you drop off training a little bit, okay, to let your body bounce back and freshen up so you can perform maybe in a minor competition. And then as you go through the season, you have to prioritize what really matters to you, right? So if it's a competition in August, or maybe it's a big one in July, that's the competition that you would do what's called a taper. So I don't know if any of you guys know what a taper is, but basically you drop off how much training you do so that your body can freshen up, can feel really, really good, and then you can perform at a level that you've never performed at before. So it's very common in quantitatively assessed sports like track, weightlifting, swimming, you'll see it, where guys are training and the sport that they're doing is just raw output, okay? So basketball, you have skill involved, right? In dunking, what heavily determines if you're gonna be good is how high you jump, right? So you're training how high you can jump, but there's also a skill component in there. So dropping off all of the other stuff that you're doing for that little 10-day period, typically during that time, what a lot of my mentors would say is keep intensity high, but keep volume low. So if this was 100% of what I was doing, maybe I drop down to 40% of what I was doing, but I keep it really light, fast movements. I maybe fast squats, or maybe I have one heavy squat session a week, because if you get away from that, you're gonna lose that fitness quality that you developed for the first 8 months, right? Even if you're elite, 2% is gonna make a significant difference. So if you can hold on to 2%, or at least one of that 2%, is probably worth doing. So how the science of that, there's obviously a lot of ways to do it, but typically it's a 10-day taper, and then you wanna drop off volume about 60%, and then keep intensity super maximal or very high. That's my personal expertise, and a lot of a researcher called Njika, I can't remember, it's like in Mujika or something like that, but he does a lot on tapers and stuff. So if you're interested, or you guys are interested, you can ask about that, and I'll refer you that way.
Those are all great points. For me, it is determining first and foremost for jumpers. It's important to understand that we have what I like to refer to as jump archetypes, which means no two people typically jump the same. And I break that down into kind of 3 categories, and I might as well touch on it now, but I was worried that some of this would bleed over. Speed jumper, power jumper, and then what we call like a neural or elastic jumper. It will vary archetype to archetype in terms of what will potentiate or create more activity in that athlete. So if I would have a power-based athlete that is loading their jump a little bit more heavily, a little bit greater range of motion, they might be potentiated with a little bit heavier loading, a little bit lighter sets, heavier loading, moving that quickly, versus a neural elastic jumper might need something a little super light, super quick, just to kind of stimulate the nervous system. And then speed is, let's stay fast. Let's take load out and then optimize that speed potentiation. So once we determine that archetype, then we can kind of develop what will optimize that athlete's potentiation or getting them ready to perform at their best. So I think they work hand in hand. I'm a huge fan of tapering my athletes toward testing and obviously competition. I typically use anywhere between an 8 and 12 day taper, depending on the athlete and depending on the load they're going to get. So you can always speak to us in greater detail on what a taper looks like and how that might serve you as an athlete.
All right, next question. Nico.
This question is for Tyler. For a lot of guys that don't know, Tyler's not just a good mind on the subject, but Tyler's like also a former pro dunker. And my question is, for a lot of the guys who are kind of like myself, like Steven and I don't know, like Austin and Josh, we're advanced, we're not like elite. What things you think you could have done differently to push yourself from pro dunker to top of the top? What things would you have changed in your training, looking back?
That's a great question. That's something that I've been asked probably 10 to 15 times thus far from a variety of different athletes here. If I could go back in time, because again, I would classify myself having been a pro dunker, but definitely not the top of the top. I was good, but not great. That's kind of how my athletic career has always been. I've been competent in many things, just never really stood out amongst my peers, which is humbling, but also teaches you a lot of lessons. I think if I could go back, the one element I would change, and I think we touched on this already, is going to be the concept of slowing down in order to speed up over time. So it's not always, and I think we, as human beings, I think beyond even training, we have a concept of there is better than here. And if only I had a 48-inch vertical, I would be happier and better and more satisfied. If only I could land that Eastbay, I would be happier that I am here. And we get so affixed on the end result that we lose track of the process. And in the process, what happens a lot of times when we're focused on there is we create elements of performance anxiety, we elevate anxiety, and as a result, that takes away our ability to produce the result we're looking for in competition and in training. So I had a few athletes during testing that were having a hard time. They were plateauing. They were whiff 1, whiff 2 on the Vertec, and what I would do is bring them aside, and you could see in the face, you can see in the chest and shoulders, when someone's carrying that performance anxiety, expectations, pressures they're putting on themselves, we get some issues with muscles, specifically our flexor muscles, activating and initiating. We get this kind of almost a bit of a damper bottleneck before the muscles are able to fully unwind and fully be usable. So I'd recommend spending a little bit more time in your current position, understanding that it's a process, it takes time, and not trying to rush to get there, because as a result, I think I lost maybe a couple, 2 or 3 years worth of competing that I'm sure I could have improved, but I trained very intensely and heavy and hard because that was the prototype of training at that point. Was you have to lift heavy, you have to lift often, you have to jump often, and my body type, and I'm sure like you're similar to me, Nico, in the sense that you are a heavier set jumper for your frame. So jumping is hard and vastly harder in many ways on athletes that are carrying additional load on their frame. So slow down a bit, take in a little bit more of the process, and I think over time you'll just thank yourself over and over again. I hope that answers your question. I know it's a lot of just kind of like maybe hippy-dippy stuff, but.
Coach McKown, I have 2 questions I want to ask you. One is, what athlete comes to mind that you saw come into the league that improved the most? And how has training changed? You've been around the league for a while. How has training changed from like guys like John Stockton to how you train guys in the league today? Has that changed very much?
Cheater.
It's first one's tough. So think about like, okay, let's say that we're all climbing Mount Everest. Closer we get to the top, the harder it is to get there, right? So if you are already an elite jumper, and use that phrase, so you are an explosive guy, an elite jumper, then it's gonna be a little bit harder, a lot harder, for you to improve your vert than it is for a guy who is just beginning, right? I mean, just makes sense. So we've had guys that have made really impressive gains, even in season, because they didn't play a lot and we trained them accordingly. But if we make it relative, right? So in other words, we're not talking about necessarily improving in that he went from, a 42-inch approach to a 48 over a career with us, or well, we had a guy who was horrible. I'm not gonna say his name, that improved his vert. Yeah, well, he improved his, actually he added 12 inches, which is unheard of over 3 years. But he had never trained. He was just in his tooth, and he's not in the league anymore. I think I'd use Jeremy Evans again as a pretty good example. Now he came in, he's an older rookie, right? He had was he a second round pick? I think he had a second round pick. Not certain, don't hold me to that. Yeah, he's drafted the same year as Gordon Hayward. He's either late first round or second round pick. He was, he'd had a redshirt year at Western Kentucky. So he might have been a 23, 24-year-old rookie, which is not young anymore. That's an older guy for a rookie now. But he was very explosive, and he was also like an injury waiting to happen because he didn't have great stability. I gotta stand up a second. It's gonna take me about an hour for you guys to that was ninja life. All right, so maybe I'm gonna move back. Maybe we can see better. Should have Ricky demonstrating this because he is the perfect example of it. So if you think about like when Jeremy Evans would go to jump, whether or not at one, he liked to be a 2-foot jumper. You guys see with an approach, you see most guys go off one or gather and go off two.
It depended upon the sport and the application.
So in your competitions.
In competitions, it could be 50-50. I think maybe heavily weighted toward a little bit more 2-foot athletes, in my opinion, a little bit more 2-foot than 1-foot.
That's interesting because and Jeremy is a 2-foot guy, right? Like he can go off of 1 foot, but he'd rather gather himself and go off 2 feet. You guys don't know who he is. He played for us. He won the dunk contest. Should have won it twice, but they don't like to do that, But he's an impressive guy. Now, but the point is, I want you to, right now, just watch my knees, right? You guys may have talked about this, Ricky. I don't know if you did or not. And Andy, if you did, I apologize, guys. But when he would approach, he would go, and then whether it was doesn't matter. He would go here, I get a lot of knee action, and then he would drop his ass, and when he did, his knees would cave in, and then he would go up. Well, if you look at a standing vert, I'm gonna go back a minute, and I might bore you, I'm gonna try not to bore you with this. But if you look at guys that have an incredible standing vert, Andrew Wiggins or Jeremy Evans or you name a guy, almost to the man, they do this, okay? Almost to the man, they do this. So they go, and they're here, and their knees are straight, right? And then when they come up, they may drop their knees. It works for them. Works for them. They get up really high, not necessarily stable. So we look at it from two different ways. We're thinking, okay, shit, this guy can jump. We don't care if you jump higher. We want you to be more stable. If I go back to Jeremy, he got more stable, but then he also actually improved his vert, which we didn't. It was just a byproduct that happened. And the reason we think that happened is because of this. And again, I bet you guys talked about this, and this is redundant. Just bear with me, right? So, longest bone in your body, right? Anybody tell me what the longest bone in your body is?
Femur.
The femur, right? So, what muscles control that femur? Makes up half your neck. Glutes. It's often the glutes. Could be glute medius, right? That's not just glutes, okay? Hip flexors, all right? But if you're training your quads because you want to somehow stabilize that femur, then you're sort of wasting your time. They're important, but it's not going to stabilize that femur. What's going to stabilize the femur are these muscles back here, so you got to hit those. The other thing is, a big, huge primary mover, the most powerful muscle in your body is what? It's your glutes. It's your glutes, right? They can generate more force than any other body, any other muscle in your body. So, let's say that you are a great jumper, you have that approach that Tyler's talked about, you step, you here, you gather, you drop, whether or not you do it in two segments, you're there, or you go right into it, and your knees cave in like that, it's going to make you more susceptible to get hurt, right? That's just, we know that. It's like one of those givens. So if you're looking at a video and you test a guy and you see that, you know that's a little bit of a red flag though. With that said, I bet you about 90% NBA guys, maybe more, actually knees dive in a bit because they tend to have long femurs and levers. All right, so one, injury risk, right? We don't want the injury stuff. Thank you. We don't want the injury risk for you, whether you're a dunker or a basketball player, or both. But we also want you to jump higher. So if we get so that you keep that femur lined up, so it doesn't dive in, it's straight up and down, and I'm going to transfer forces. So in other words, you gather yourself, you're driving through that floor, you're literally like pushing off that floor, you're generating incredible like power forces, right, to propel your body up 48 inches. You like 48 inches? 48 inches, right? That's freaking impressive. And a smart guy like Ricky would do the math and tell us exactly what the power produced there was. Ricky, he'll do it for you. Think about this. So I'm driving these forces up from the ground. My feet are right here, and let's say that I draw a line that's showing the direction of those forces. So if my knees do this, and that red line isn't, if it does, it's inefficient, right? That red line goes this way or that way, then if you see that, like on a force plate, you won't. But if you did, like your legs are working against each other and it's, you're not going to generate a lot of force. But what you're usually going to see, if I'm trying to go straight up and my knees dive in, I'm here, that red line's going to go straight up and it's going to be outside my knees. So not only am I going to be at a higher risk for injury, I'm reducing the possibility to generate force. So if I improve my glute strengths, this, glute, hip, the hip abductors, the ability to that, right? Not just that, but think about that. If I improve that, then that's going to line my knee up better. I'm going to drive off that floor. Those forces are going straight through. They're going to be a lot more efficient. I'm going to be more powerful. The likelihood I'm going to be more powerful as long as I don't neglect focusing, training power as well as strength. You guys talk about that? I definitely don't. Yeah. Well, I'll pass it. The point is, my joints line up, in this case my knees. I drive from the floor, force is going through my knees, through my hips, I'm gonna jump higher, right? And I'm gonna be less likely to get hurt. And the last thing, I'll tell you this one real quick. Ass load is inappropriate. Is that inappropriate? So ass load means a lot, right? So there's an ass load of research that would tell you there's a correlation between sprint speed and vertical jump. Typically a standing vert, right? But it also makes sense with an approach. I would bet there's data, Tyler. I'm sure that
We're trying to work on getting more.
So, but what we found, and this is in the biggest NBA database period for testing for physical assessments, what we found is that there's a very big correlation between the ability to generate forces laterally and vertical jump, which on one-step approach, right? So this. So if the hoop is here, okay, and I'm giving you a choice. You can do it any way you want to. But the hoop's here. I just want to see how you do with one step. So your one step could be bam, bam, jump, right? Just like a drop step. We can let you do this, or you could be just bam, bam. It could be, which we've seen some guys do, and they're not, it's typically not a good jumper. Could be a guy that just goes off of 1 foot, which is so awkward I can't even demonstrate it. But the point is that what we found is those guys that are really good with this, which is more basketball applicable, but I think relates to dunking as well. What we found is that those guys that can do that really well can also get on, so we got this, it's a plate, so like a jump mat, it's going to measure how well you generate, how much force you generate, what direction. So we found that guys that can, boom, generate, like you guys did on the Kaiser, the guys can generate a lot of force that way, can generate a lot of force that way when they move into it. Now it's hard, we can't, too many variables. It's hard to measure with an approach. You can't do it on force plates. Damn it. Thanks. They just didn't even hear the last 30 minutes talking to myself, right? Yeah. That's it. That's enough, right? I'm just getting carried away. I'm
So, can we just follow up? I've been wanting to ask you this since we met, is how has training changed in the last 20 years? Or so? Yeah.
No, that's a great question. In the last 20 years, a couple of things.
Tell a story when you started with Westminster, how that progressed into the P3. And then, just so you know, Coach McKown was the first NBA strength coach to utilize P3, which is now 80-90% of the NBA teams use them for consulting. Coach McKown kind of led the way, pioneered that, and transformed the Jazz and how to be smarter about training these NBA guys. And I love the story about Westminster with how that all started and how that changed till now.
It's fair enough. So, all right. I'll give you a little back. I might have a tendency to give you too much information because I want you to have background. But if you keep in mind, not that long ago, let's say 20 years, which is not that long ago for some people in here, right? Nobody in the league hardly had a nice practice facility. There were just a very small handful of teams that had nice. The Clippers up until the last 7 years practiced at a health club that had a court that's hard as the concrete that you might play on. But now they have a really nice practice site, practice facility. We used to practice at Westminster. We had this is John and Carl, who did not, by the way, want to leave. So we moved to another facility. It's really nice, and we built our own. They wanted to stay at Westminster. Just, I don't know. I know, I'm just not going to say. But at that time, if we go back, I don't know, if we go back, one thing that stayed constant, this is constant, right? If you train hard, chances are you're smart, you're going to get better, right? The one, I'm not going to tell you everybody in here, if your goal is to play in the NBA, I'm definitely not going to tell you that. You want to do it, you can do it, because life isn't like that. If you want to be a pro dunker, I can't even tell you that. I don't know, maybe. There's genetic factors God gave us, He didn't make me very athletic. He made me really handsome, right? So, I'm grateful for that. It's obviously another joke, and it's bullshit. You guys will give me a little courtesy chuckle like that. I'll take it. But I can guarantee you everybody in here can get better. I can guarantee you that. I know that. I've seen it on you know, like guys coming in the NBA, they think, man, I'm just trying, you know, I'm here, I work on my skills, you know, try to stay where I am, but that's, I mean, you get better, you can be a better athlete. And the constant is training hard, training smart, which doesn't mean always training with a great deal of intensity. You know, I don't know, biggest changes would be for some teams training on game day, like, you know, like, or we call it activation session, but really for some guys it's sort of a training session. And even guys that, you know, play a lot of minutes, do at least something, unless it's a back-to-back game and we just want to warm them up a little bit and use up a little more juice. I say that, but you know, like you got to figure Carl and John, just because of their mentality, were ahead of the curve. So they were doing that back in the day, and that sort of got the other players doing it because they wanted to be like John and Carl. I don't mind. I mean, like I.
Things have changed.
Okay, I got you. The when I hate it when people do this, and I'm gonna do it right now. When I started working with Carl, he hadn't really trained his lower body much. I mean, he's like most guys. I'm not guys being unisex, right? Want to look good in the mirror, you know? I mean, everybody in here knows somebody that loves training their upper body, and they got those little skinny legs. They wear, you know, long pants, so you don't see just how disgusting their legs are. It's me right now. And then, so Carl hadn't trained his lower body much, and he was, no, he wasn't young. I mean, he was getting, you know, he was already, you know, he was ahead of the curve. If you look at guys' normal career, you know, or about the top of it. But he had never trained his lower body much, and during the off season, he'd never done plyometrics or any kind of jump training. And so we did incorporate that with him. And the guy dug it because he made gains, right? Made gains, and people already talking about him being over the hill. Won his second MVP. He's 37 years old, I think. He was, old as dirt, buddy. But now there's a better method to the madness, right? So, you know, we could eyeball you and think, man, that guy can't move very good, you know, or he's great linearly, straight. He's great vertically, but he can't change directions, can't control it. And I feel like if I'm a good dunker, I still have to be able to change directions because I'm like efficiently, because I'm going forward and then I'm going up, one way or the other. And usually I'm going forward, I'm going up, and I'm going at an angle, correct? And I'm gonna mix in some other stuff, so I gotta be able to control my body really well. Well, since back in the day, we're much more efficient at measuring how guys move. So with cameras, like you guys seen how they make video games or motion capture? Have you guys talked about that?
Which we will have at next year's dunk camp.
So next year's dunk camp via Norton Performance, Ricky Norton at nortonperformance.com. I don't know, I just made that up. As long as we go. So, you know, you put the markers on the guy, right? You guys seen this, like how they made Gollum on Lord of the Rings, or any movie that has, what is it? I can't think, it's got CGI, thank you. Then it's the same technology, right? We just might put markers on you, and then we can see joint angles, like I heard Tyler and John mention earlier. We can see how fast those joints move, etc. So we can do how much force you generate, what direction that force is in.
How many NBA teams have that now?
More and more teams have it now.
You guys were the first, right?
Well, we were the first to use it.
And then you guys brought them in.
Well, but then.
It's along that same question. How
So-
the NBA's changed. Now there's like what, 6, 7?
No, there's more than that even, yeah, but There's a lot of teams have it now. They don't necessarily use it the same way, or might not be real comfortable with doing some things, but a lot of teams have it. I don't know. So, look, we test you. We say, okay, look, this guy needs to. We're looking at your knees cave. I'll just go back to that. This is one thing. We'll look at your knees cave, or we'll look at this and we'll see. We'll do a very simple test for calf strength, which I don't know if we talked about.
We did.
Yep. Which is a pretty good indicator, right? And I'm not going to bore you with that, but we'll look at different things. We'll identify what your problem is or what your problems are, other than, things we can't help, like, the fact that you don't look as good as me in the mirror. But we can make you a better athlete because we measure it better. I got no idea. I got so freaking messed up. Yeah, man. Oh, yeah, wow. Oh, great. Such a man, good memory. Where are you from? That's impressive. Yeah. So, Bryce, he asked about Bryce Cotton, who is, I'm sure, an incredible job. Played for Phoenix, because he played with Earl Watson when he was here, and Earl's coaching down there, and he liked him a lot and got him into Phoenix for a while. I don't know if he's still in the league. It's a great question. So Bryce Cotton, actually, he was right there with Jeremy on a vert with an approach, and he was small. You just said it. 5'9", I think is legit, maybe generous. But it's interesting, he had similar issues to Jeremy. You typically, those issues like where your knees cave are with taller guys or weaker guys. He wasn't weak. He just hadn't trained real smart, so he didn't have good stability. And he had an injury, I think, as a result. But I think he had a 48-inch approach. I'd have to check just to see. But that's a good, like, blast from the past. It was nice for me. I appreciate it.
First of all, Coach, awesome. Thank you very much for the stories, and I could sit here and listen all day. I'm sure I'll pick your brain more afterward. You spoke a lot about internal rotation, valgus fault through loading phase, and it's funny because I've been doing a lot more research in this area lately because there's so many commonalities and crossovers between some of the best leapers of all time, whether basketball, volleyball, typically bilateral leapers, having a certain degree of valgus or internal slack during takeoff. And correct me if I'm wrong, obviously the femur needs to be ground and stable during takeoff, and typically we cue and coach external torque through the hip. But the femur is one of those bones, as is many in the body, that will search for the closest point of stability, which in sometimes will be internally if there is some external restriction. So we get a little bit of valgus during loading in some high leapers because of some restriction through the hip, and you can still create torque internally as you can externally. So I guess my question would be, first of all, have you heard of this, and is there merit to, I guess, not discounting the ability of an athlete to be safe over time with some degree of internal fault, I guess you would call it, or internal rotation during takeoff? Does that make sense? Is that a question? Yeah, so the question would be, would you say that there's some evidence to suggest, or at least through your experience, that some degree of internal rotation or valgus through the femur can and should be considered safe over time with appropriate stability protocol in place in the gym?
Knowledge.
All right, I don't know. I don't want to underestimate anybody in here, but so quick, and again, you guys may have talked about this. So I'm going to try to talk loud because I can't do this with the mic in my hand, okay? So,
I'm the same way. I don't like speaking with the microphone.
next year they'll have the little things, you know, like the wireless mics here. Yeah, Ricky, you'll get into that thing. All right. So typically when you have really explosive forces going through the joint, so it could be this. It could be that I'm just going to change direction, so I plant and I'm going that way. That's where a lot of knee injuries happen, right? Just that change of direction more than not. And the reason is because your body's putting on brakes, you generated so much force. Here's a good one for you. Put my keys over here, and that is my truck, and kick Ricky's ass in that. Okay.
Oh, rapid reboot, guys.
Rapid release. So, oh, okay. All right. They can hang your boots. When you absorb those, you go off, let's say that you stood on this table, and that table I think is probably 32 inches, I don't know. It's not quite 3 feet. When you go off that table, let's just say you step off that table, and then you land on the floor. And you're absorbing, one way or another, about 2.5 times body weight. Okay, does that make sense? So let's say that you weigh, simple math here, let's say that you weigh 200 pounds, all right? And we're talking about 500 pounds, right? 500 pounds that you have to absorb. If I do this with Ricky, so just like you do, right? And that's it. Woo! Okay, if I do this with Ricky, right? And I say, hey, Rick, like, go ahead, press your button, okay? It's like, go ahead and pull me up. He's faking a little bit, but I do that and stop. Now, if I say, Ricky, don't let me push you down, okay? Let me push you down, okay? It's hard to do. You're stronger eccentrically, right? That's the negative part of this. So when you put on brakes, you have to be stronger eccentrically so that you can control your body and change direction. Get to the tower. It is a natural defense mechanism in your body, right? If you picture in there, this will help you when we get into anatomy, physiology. If you picture in there all those little muscle fibers being like, you guys know what Chinese handcuffs are? You know, put your fingers in there and you try to pull them apart and they tighten up. You can't. That's a muscle fiber. Okay, that's the way they work. So that muscle fiber contracts, slides over, and then when you are lowering weight, you are, absorbing forces, then it locks in there to give you better control. All right, so that's the first thing that you take into consideration. Typically what happens is, for whatever reason, over time, it doesn't look like we as humans have developed the hip rotators, so things that just like will help you open up, and the hip abductors that help you do this, which help control that finger, okay? So to go back to what Tyler said, when you're absorbing forces, what happens is if this represents my femur, top part of your knee, typically that femur's going to rotate in some. And then it gets to a point where it's like a point of no return. So if it rotates too far, then what's going to happen is most commonly, you guys know, it's going to be an ACL, right? So has anybody in here had ACL surgery? Huh? Now, ACL surgery doesn't mean that, life's over, you're done. It just means that you're going to take you really, truly, how long ago did you have that surgery?
3-4 years ago.
So what research looks like, it takes about truly about 3 years to recover from that. Now they get guys back on the court, field, really fast, sometimes too fast, but the most common injury is either a cartilage tear or an ACL tear. Usually both together, which you might have. But not only do you get that femur rotating in, the tibia will at times, a lot of times, rotate out. So then that's really when you go stuff, right? You know, that's when it's really bad. One, let's go back to your thing, your question with Bryce Cotton. I don't think, because he really worked hard on this, probably violating HIPAA, I'm thinking that, which is a federal law. By asking him, Ricky Norton. Another joke, and like, all right. Man, I shouldn't give this information, but it's a good deal. So, in Tyler, in Bryce's case, he was flat-footed. I mean, really grossly flat-footed, right? So if you're looking at his shoes off, it almost looked like he was walking on the inside of his ankle. You guys see him right here, flat-footed. Right? So what happens? That puts you in a position where you're gonna get that knee dive, right? Good for you. Just look. I mean, I'm seeing these two big muscular thighs. That's nice, right? I'm assuming that you're pretty strong back here as well. It's even better. But because he was flat-footed, when he would plant, then that does this, right? So that's forcing that in. That forces that in. The tibia naturally rotates out, right? And then the femur is still gonna. So tibia is rotating this way, femur is rotating that way. You got these ligaments that hold those bones together, and they only go so far. And you don't want lax ligaments. You want semi-lax ligaments. Not a lot you can do for them anyway. You know, in that regard. But when that happens, it again increases your risk of injury. So let's say that you get, just make it real simple. Let's say that your femur rotates in, your tibia rotates out. That's not, you're not going, oh my God, I'm gonna get hurt. You know, and you're not going, oh my God, I can't generate force, because it's not a guarantee of either one of those. But if you got that, you can improve it. And if you improve that, so in other words, you slow the rate either of the tibia, that bottom bone, tibia is a big bone right down here, shin bone. And so you can control that. A lot of times it's gastroc strength, a lot of times it's like anterior tibial muscles in the front, strength, calf strength, lower leg strength, other things. I control that, and I improve my hips. I'm going to control this better. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop it. And again, less likely to get hurt, but because I think probably everybody in here, but maybe 2 or 3 of you guys, feel like all of us did at one point. We're sort of invincible. All right? So, and you don't need to think about injuries right now. Just telling you, just as a bonus, less likely to get hurt, but the chances are you're going to be able to be more explosive, generate more force.
Would that also, that's a big correlation with, he's going to talk about it later, patellar tendinosis, right? You're going to talk about that, just a lot of the slack.
Who's that?
Sorry, John's going to speak on it later, but the hip stability would kind of make
From my eye.
Oh, I just have a quick question. For just jump and dunk training for everybody, what's a quick way, because most of us don't have access to trainers like this at all times, so like just at home, what's a good way to like diagnose what training you should start with or what you should be doing?
I don't know. I think these guys are going to give you feedback.
Right.
On that. Or from my speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Just something generic for everybody to take away.
Okay.
Absolutely. When I get any, new athlete, current competitive athlete, the very first protocol that we implement with them is just generalized like dynamic and static stabilization of your joint. So I'll speak a little bit later on the concept of applying force to a point to where you can't stabilize that force. So I think if you're going to bias any part of your training, in my professional opinion, my personal opinion, stability, elements of stability through ankles, knees, hips, midline, trunk, shoulders, neck is probably the one that you can start with. And then from that point is when you're going to start to get into more specificity in terms of, you know, energy system protocols and you know, cycles of training, things like that. I think the biggest advice I can give is don't overcomplicate things for yourself, especially out of the gate. There's a lot of information coming at you, lots of, you know, experience in the room and different ways to, you know, many ways to skin a cat. I know it's a kind of a morbid analogy, but keep it simple, and consistency is going to be your biggest friend over time. But stability protocol, in my opinion, and that's what, when people ask me like, man, how did you jump so high when you were competitive? I spent so much time moving around on single limbs and hopping on single limbs and stabilizing myself that I think for me, having been a very speed-oriented leaper, that my greatest strength was my ability to translate horizontal speed through resiliency in the joints associated to jumping.
Look, guys, has anybody taken a class in your life? For me, it was over and over Spanish. Has anybody taken a class in your life where you're going, man, I can't, well, I don't know where to start. I'm so far behind in this class, like you're freaking out, right? Be honest. I mean, who's, and then some of you guys are just too damn smart. It's okay. I'm not mad at you about that. But it's true, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be a class, but it's a pretty good example where you got all this information, which Tyler's talking about, and you don't know what to do with that information. So the thing is, you do have to keep it simple. We threw a lot of stuff at you. Look, you don't need to know that the femur rotates in and the tibia rotates out a lot of times, right? When you jump or external forces. You don't need to know that. What you need to know is, okay, what do I need to specifically do to jump higher, move more efficiently, right? That's pretty much it. And then where the good thing comes in is you do have really good guys working with you. And these guys are, honestly, I mean, it's like, I promise you, I don't even know what you're paying for this camp, but I promise you, you're getting your bang for your buck just for the fact that you're getting education from these guys. So, I was sitting there thinking I'm making it way too complicated because I about dozed off. And it happens sometimes, just have narcolepsy. That's bullshit, it's not true, it's a joke, Jesus. Made me use the Lord's name in vain, going to hell. The point is, keep it simple, and there are simple things. So I'll do this real quick, and don't right now get anxious about picking out what the best thing to do for each. You're not going to go wrong if you build a big, actually you're going to go right, and you need to if you build a solid strength base, right? Total body strength base. There's a ton of different ways to train smart. I'm going to say this just because it's a big point of emphasis, and then the other thing is it's relatively new with the research, is there's a lot of good ways to hit your hips. You can't hit your hips too much. You can, but you're probably, in all sincerity, you're not going to hit your hips too much. And then you train to be more efficient. So that means that you've got to do movements that are somewhat demanding, that you can do, that you challenge yourself, that's going to make your body more efficient. So it's in tons of other things. The 3 priorities, and that's my 3 priorities. Hard word, priorities for you, right? So these guys might have different priorities, but I bet we overlap if they do.
Perfect.
Okay, I know lunch is here. You guys are probably getting hungry. Let's just have one question. Last question, we'll wrap it up. Jay Clark?
You talked a lot about hip strength, and if you could pick one exercise for the hips and glutes, what exercise would be a staple to kind of strengthen the hips and the glutes?
fair question. Okay. But I'll do my best. So, if I'm gonna hit my hips, well, you know, the question was one exercise. I'm gonna put a little onus on Ricky, okay? And, tell you that Ricky is going to, how much more do y'all have in camp? Okay. Ricky, with John, Tyler, and Andy are gonna hit you with some stuff for your hips, okay? That's it, because there's not one, because it's not, part of it is you gotta improve the strength of these hips, but then what we found, and I think both John and Tyler hit on this, is you can have these big, strong muscles, but your body doesn't know when to use them. So then you have, it's neuromuscular stuff, which these guys talked about. So then you have to teach your body to use them. Big, strong muscles, but if your body doesn't use them, it doesn't matter, right? So that means doing movements where the focus is on the hips. So that means so you do hip stuff. We would start you with bands between your knees, making you activate. And the big thing is it's gonna, that's gonna improve your strength some, but then it's gonna get to the point where it's just a cue. So in other words, it's like reminding, oh, I gotta engage my hips, Then we're gonna, it sounds like reverse, but then we're gonna transfer you off the band in the long run, where you're doing movements that would be, again, sort of slow without the band, but you gotta activate those muscles yourself. And begin with, it's gonna be a cognizant thought. And if I am going to dump or do anything, and I'm thinking, okay, I gotta engage my hips, are you kidding me? It's gonna be horrible, right? You can't do that. It has to be instinctive. It's like catching the ball and going into your shot. You sure can't think about all the things that your coach taught to you about your shot. Not the best example, but an example. So, to get back, there's a progression, right? I'm gonna say progression with the band, a bunch of different exercises. We have 6 exercises we do, and the guys have to be able to hold these for a minute each. When they graduate from that, then we'll increase the resistance on those bands, but in the meantime, we're working on movement strategies, so we're teaching them to move more efficiently. I dodged the question because it's too hard, and you just screwed me up, so I tried to make it simple.
All right.
Okay. Thanks for those who are watching online, and let's eat lunch. Thanks, guys.